Hello, hello. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Dana. I'm from Divine Goddess Cards. Today I'm going to be sharing a fun technique, or a twist on a fun technique that you may have seen before. It's most commonly called the Faux Bleach technique, which is where you take a dye ink, you put it on a surface, and you remove it with water, typically. But I'm going to be sharing today how to do that same technique using the Dura-Bright white and some alcohol inks. To start this project, you want to grab a piece of the Dura-Bright and your alcohol inks. I just cut this down into a tag shape. This tag is about 3.5 by 6, I believe. Yes, and then I just cornered or chopped the corners off so it looks more like a tag. But I'm going to be doing two different color sections on it. I'm going to be using flower stamps. So I want this to kind of look like ground and then sky. So I'm going to be doing blue and brown. So to start off, I'm just going to put a little bit of rubbing alcohol down on my surface. And then I'm going to grab my lightest alcohol ink. And since I'm doing the top, I'm going to start with the blue. And I'm just going to randomly put some on there. I'm going to go with my mid-tone as well. And then using my little air tool here, I'm just going to move that around. Now this technique I have found it works better with darker colors. So I'm going to gradually get darker with my colors and then do the same technique here, just kind of move it around. I'm really looking for more of like a mottled look. Lots of texture, lots of visual texture is really what I'm looking for. Some darker blue. And you just want to continue doing this until you're happy with it. And then you'll move on to the next color, which for my next color again is going to be browns. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing for my browns. Start off with a little rubbing alcohol and then go in with my lightest brown color. And then a little bit of my medium. And where the two meet, I want them to kind of mix and overlap, but not to the point where it's like mud. I mean, yes, I'm using brown, but I don't want like an icky color. I like brown, but I don't want like an icky color. Go in with my darker. Okay, so now I'm going to leave this to completely dry. The next step that I'm going to be doing is using embossing powder. So I don't want any of that embossing powder to stick to any of the wet areas or any areas that may still be wet from the alcohol ink. So I'm going to let it completely dry. Okay, so now that the background is dry, I'm going to move on to the next step. And like I said, we're going to be using some embossing powder. So I'm just taking my embossing tool and running it over the surface here. This just gets rid of any static or anything, so that the embossing powder only sticks to the ink. And all it is just a brush with some powder in there. I'm not entirely sure what the powder is. I think it's either kaolin clay or cornstarch, but anything that you have will work. And then I'm going to be using some flower stamps for this, but any stamps that have an open area will work. And to make it easier, I did put my background in my stamping tool. And I'm just going to ink up the stamp. Now you can emboss with anything that's wet. You can even emboss with water. It just depends on how much you have to hurry. Like if the medium that you're using dries really, really quickly, then you have to hurry to get the embossing powder on there and get it melted. But I am just using an embossing ink. Well, for this stamp, I'm only inking up the flower portion. I don't want any of the stems. At least not yet. I might add another one, but real quick, I'm going to emboss it real quick so that I can see what's going on here. So the embossing powder that I'm using is just going to be a white embossing powder. You can use, again, any embossing powder that you have for this. My biggest tip with embossing powder is before you heat anything, make sure that you put the lid back on your jar, because otherwise you're probably going to end up with it everywhere. I know from experience. When you're heat embossing on the Duralar or the Dura-Bright, you want to make sure that you keep your heat tool moving because you can melt and warp this. And then for the next step, you want to just grab a dish of some sort and some rubbing alcohol. I prefer to use a higher percentage rubbing alcohol for this. This one is 91%. I know in some areas 91 is scarce, so 99 is more common. That's totally fine. The number is just the percentage of alcohol versus water, so the higher the better. Totally fine. And then you can use a water brush for this technique. I prefer to just use a paintbrush and a dish of the rubbing alcohol. I feel like I have a little bit more control. But all you're going to do is literally paint the rubbing alcohol on there and then dab the alcohol ink off. And you just want to be kind of cautious about how much you put on there. You have to remember that this is a non-porous surface, so the rubbing alcohol is going to spread even past the embossing powder. You just want to keep doing that until you have all the alcohol removed that you want. You don't have to completely remove all of the alcohol in each petal if you don't want to. It doesn't need to be white. And some of them I even like to leave it a little mottled. And you want to make sure that you're using a clean portion of the paper towel. Otherwise, you're just going to put the rubbing alcohol back on there. Or not the rubbing alcohol, the alcohol ink. And then sometimes you may get a little texture from the paper towel itself if your paper towel like mine has texture. You can get some that aren't decorated if you prefer. But I like the little extra texture. Since I'm going into the blue, I'm going to grab a clean paper towel here because I don't want any brown in my blue. Go. So you can see how the darker colors, it gives it more of a contrast versus if you were to just do like the lighter colors. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat this pattern up here. So let me stamp that and emboss it and I'll be right back. Okay, so now that I got the top portion done, I am happy with this background. So I went ahead and I created this little focal piece to put on it. And to adhere this down, I'm just going to use a little bit of the double tack adhesive. This is a full sheet adhesive that Grafix offers. And typically the way that I use this is I will just cut little squares off and then put it on the back of my project, essentially turning it into a sticker. And I don't worry about covering the full thing. As long as I cover enough to know that it's secured, I am totally fine with that. So then I'm just going to adhere this about here. And then to decorate the top, or the little hole, I did create this fun little charm here. And this was done using the shrink film. And I used the metallic set. So this will come in a gold and a silver metallic film. And you can die cut this with your wafer thin dies. So just to give you an example here, this is what the charm originally looks like. Before I shrunk it down, so you can see the size difference here, and then it's also quite a bit thicker once you shrink it down, so just kind of keep that in mind. And then I just have some seam binding here that I'm going to also use. This is just some seam binding that I coffee dyed, and then I let it dry kind of all crinkled up. I'm just going to feed this through the hole. Put my tails through. There we go. And then I put the little charm on a bulb pin here so that I can just attach that through the seam binding. And then there's a little charm dangle on it. How cute is that? And there we go. That finishes the final project for the faux bleaching technique or ghost technique or however you want to refer to this. That's how you do it using a bit of the Dura-Bright in white and then also some alcohol and alcohol inks. Now you could also do this on the Duralar, the matte, or the clear. You're just going to get a completely different look. But thank you for joining me today. There is a full supply list in the description box below. And if you're interested in any of these products that I used today from Grafix, they are available on grafixarts.com. Again, thank you for joining me today, and I will see you in the next one.